Well, hi guys, Lance here from the Rocky Mountain Life channel, and I've got a special guest with me today. I have Pharettface of Pharettface Fail Productions, and I will print that on the screen so you guys can find his channel and check it out. And if you guys watched my latest video, you will know that I had the opportunity to ride this gentleman's 2019 Beta 390 RRS. And I was really excited to ride it, and I was really excited after I rode it because it is an excellent machine. And when we did that ride together, we actually didn't have the right kind of communication devices where we could record us talking to each other and have that make it onto our film footage, mostly because I don't own the right pieces of equipment yet. But we wanted to get together and chat just a little bit about our thoughts and our impressions on what these two bikes both feel like. One thing that's kind of interesting about Betas to me is they've got all kinds of displacements, the 2 strokes and the 4 strokes. 4 strokes, 350, 390, 430, 500. It can be a little bit, I guess, maybe overwhelming for somebody who's not familiar with the Beta lineup. And how do you pick what kind of machine you want? And I think this is going to be something that might help a lot of folks in kind of figuring out which direction they might want to go if they're looking for getting one.
We had kind of either some different opinions and just some thoughts and ideas about two people that own bikes from different years. Because I know people look at these bikes used, so say maybe a 19 or older. So I know the 16 to 19 years are pretty much the same bikes, and then we've got the 2020s have some changes that are actually pretty decent, I think. To me, it was kind of amazing how the bikes are on the same chassis, but the engines really give the bike a completely different feel in what you're riding. I think the 390 gives a little bit more of that low end grunt and engine feel for trails that's not overwhelming. But whereas the 500 kind of gives you an almost motocross feel, but the flywheel weight and the way that the engine runs is still very much a trail machine or an enduro bike, I guess, as some people will call them. But I had an absolute blast riding Lance's 500. There's probably not a whole lot of changes engine-wise from the 19 500 to the 2021, but I think they smoothed out the throttle range quite a bit as my biggest thing. Now you can really feather low end of the throttle and just kind of point the bike. You really kind of feel like you steer with the rear of that bike because it's got so much power at all times.
Well, my lack of skills on the bike is enough that if I'm not careful with my 500, it can get me in some hassles and get me in some trouble. I've actually dumped it a couple times for no other reason other than I blipped the throttle coming out of a corner and it just was a little bit too much throttle, more than what I wanted.
I definitely had a few of those moments. The 500 is awesome, not only because it's power, but actually the rain map kind of is a saving grace there too. It really kind of, I would say like the first 25% of the throttle, it softens it up a lot so you don't whiskey throttle yourself to death. And that's a great thing. I talked about that in my video a little bit.
Yeah, I've played quite a bit with the rain map on the 500, and the thing that I noticed is at low RPMs, it really mutes the power down. So, as you're coming out of a corner, or you're coming out of something tight and you want to go ahead and get on the throttle, but you're not looking to scream someplace, that helps you kind of control that initial burst of power. But I've also noticed that once the RPMs reach a certain level, it's almost like the rain map turns off and it's back to performance mode and it just goes again. So it is really good for low RPM control and slow speed control, but I find that at higher speeds or higher RPMs, the power comes right back on it. And as I've mentioned in my videos, I chose the 500, which is what's behind us here. I chose the 500 in part because my last bike was a 2003 KLR 650. Big, heavy monster. Not an especially powerful big heavy monster. And I always, every time I rode it, I thought, I wish this thing had just a little bit more power, just a little bit more power. I struggled with that feeling the entire 8-9 years I owned that bike, and I didn't want to go through that again. And so I opted for the 500 instead of the 390 like you've got, simply because I was afraid of feeling underpowered. Well, then I got on your bike and I rode it. And it's nowhere near underpowered. That 390's power delivery is so spectacular. It is so linear and so smooth throughout the entire rev range. I just find it to be phenomenal. I really enjoyed it, and that flyweight and such. I never can figure out how to describe that sensation.
I always call it rotational mass in the engine. And we talk about that because I think on paper, I was looking it up last night, your 500 is within a couple of pounds of my 390s from 19. But it doesn't feel like it when you ride it because the engine mass of the 500, it really gives the bike a less nimble feeling, maybe. Mm-hmm. It's not so much weight. It's just when you're throwing it around, you can really feel the 500's engine mass. The 390, it's very flickable. You can kind of throw it around a little bit easier. The 500, you have to put more effort into it, and it's not that the bike feels heavy. It really, truthfully, is not heavy. It's just you feel it, especially in some of the slower, tighter areas. And then I think part of the other reason that kind of maybe exacerbates that is the 500's final drive gear ratio is a little bit taller. So first gear is going to be a little bit taller than the 390's is. I know the 430 and the 500 get a little bit taller gearing than the 390 and smaller bikes do.
But I did notice that because I put the 13-tooth front sprocket on mine, which matched yours. Mm-hmm. Both of our bikes have the 48-tooth rear sprockets that come with the bikes. So I expected the gearing to feel the same, but the 390 definitely was shorter. And I think getting back to that inertial mass thing, I think it's an inertia thing is the way I describe it in my own head, is when you cut the throttle on the 500, it wants to carry forward a little bit more than that 390. And so you go into a hard corner and you get off the throttle and you're trying to flick that thing around the corner. My bike tends to want to push out to the side just a little bit more while yours will just whoop and just roll right around that corner. I don't know how else to explain it. I just know that when I was riding your 390, I really felt like it was noticeably, not a massive amount, but noticeably easier to maneuver through those tight spaces. It was very confidence inspiring.
Yeah, the 390, that's kind of why I had chose it, as most people online regard the 390 as the best trail bike. And when Meeker Extreme and I, we had the 500 and the 390 to compare side by side, we definitely agreed that the 390, especially for that model year, was the better trail bike. Between its gearing and the 500 and the 19 kind of had an issue where it would flame out down low. Also had that higher gearing, so Mark had went to a bigger rear sprocket for doing singlets track, and he lost a lot of I guess 6-gear performance on the highway. So that was a big compromise for the 500 that you actually didn't have to take on the 390. It was kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, they definitely fixed for 2021 what I'm going to call the very low RPM flameout issues on the 2021. I don't know if it's because of the dual injection or what. The 519 kind of had that very jerky feeling down low, and you kind of had to use the clutch a bit more to keep it running, whereas the 390, you really feel like you can drag it all the way down to its bottom and it'll keep going. Yeah. I think it just really kind of has to do with the 390's got a really long bore stroke, even compared to the 500. You just kind of get that very tractor-like feel. The 390, what it doesn't have though is it does not have the top end of the 500 for either year. The top end of the 500 is absolutely monstrous and is a blast. And I talked about this when you're on trails, even the ATV trails that we're doing, you really find that you can't use the power of the 500 because you'll quickly overwhelm yourself, at least at my level.
Oh, mine too. That way. I either overwhelm myself or I overwhelm myself right off the edge of the trail.
Yeah. So yeah, the 390, it's got plenty of power and into the trails and stuff, but when you're wide open, very large spaces, the top end is definitely not the same as the 430 or the 500. So
I haven't had the opportunity to ride a 430. I don't know what those characteristics are like, but
I actually think the 430's got a little bit more top end than the 500 does. In
really?
Some ways. Yeah, I think it's just how it's tuned.
It's interesting. I know I've read a lot online where folks suggest that the 500 get short shifted and keep the RPMs down. Mm-hmm. I've always felt like this thing likes to wind out. It likes the higher RPMs. It seems to be happier when it's above 7,000 RPMs. But I've never had it flame out on me. I've stalled it, but that's because I came to a stop.
Yeah, that's true.
But I've never had it just choke out and flame out on me, which I'm grateful for. I feel like it's made it easier for me to work with it. If I was constantly having to feather the clutch all the time, my clutch skills are not superb, especially when I'm concentrating on staying upright, dodging rocks or roots or whatever. I'm afraid that having a flame out issue like you described that the 2019s had in the 500s, that would stress me out. That would cause me problems.
Yeah, and they may have fixed that with later tuning for the 500s in the EFI department. Beta, what they do all the time is they'll create new maps for older bikes So my 19, for example, is on probably almost a 2-year-old map now. I haven't gone and got the new maps, and I don't change it because what works is what works, and I feel like the bike's pretty good. Of course, there could be more performance on the table, but they may have solved that flame out issue on the RRS models from 19 a little bit more. But
yeah, I know mine doesn't seem to have it. But people talk about dual fuel injectors is better than a single one. I really had a hard time feeling a difference as far as throttle response. And what I mean by throttle response, the way I define it, is how quickly do I get power from the time it takes me to twist the throttle to the time I feel it. I couldn't see any delay. I mean, yours was very snappy, very quick, very, very crisp with the throttle response. So I'm not exactly sure if anybody could even feel the difference between the two of them as far as dual fuel injectors.
Yeah, I couldn't tell a difference myself either. In the throttle response on both the bikes is phenomenal. Like
yeah.
That's one thing Beta does, I think, extremely well. Beta being a smaller company, they can get away with having a much more powerful initial mapping from the factory compared to like KTM and Husqvarna. So I've always felt the KTMs definitely have a little bit of a lag off the bottom end, and that's usually all fixed with tuning. But it also, I like that because you don't have to mess with the Beta as much. They feel very uncorked from the factory. I think that's a huge selling point in Beta. And I agree with that. That's pretty cool. So.
I also like the fact that Beta is very responsive to the customer base.
Yeah.
You get massive, huge companies, maybe somebody like KTM or Honda or Yamaha or any of these really, really big companies. They're not going to be all that concerned what a small group of guys in California that ride or in Colorado that ride their bikes are going to feel. But you can actually communicate with Beta as an individual and say, hey, you know what? I've noticed this about my bike. I really would like to see this changed. And it would. I've mentioned it in my videos in the past. The tailpipe on these things have that funny little angled little tack welded thing on there. And that was just a response from people, customers like us, complaining about the tailpipe melting that right turn signal on the back of these RRSs.
Yep.
So they just altered the trajectory of that exhaust away from the turn signals a little bit. And it's those types of things that I really like about Beta, is how they will actually listen to their customers' complaints and positive feedback about what they like about the bikes, and they implement that in the next model and they try and adjust, as opposed to just putting out the bike and saying, here you go, and be happy with it.
Yeah, that is such a good point too. And the 2021 is a great example of that. From adding the I'm going to call it the kickstand extender at the bottom. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that Beta probably ordered these by like the tens of thousands, and that's why they're still using these kickstands. But they found a solution to everybody's complaint, which is that kickstand sinks all the way into the dirt and the bikes fall over, and it's one of the most complained about things. But now they've got a fix from the factory. The melting tail light issue, like he had just talked about, I know because I've melted several and I've given up on my Beta. So. But yeah, there's just so much that Beta likes to do from year to year that a lot of times they're not huge changes, but they add to the experience more and more from year to year. I would say the 19 Betas, while only a few years ago there are some big changes, at the same time the 19 Betas aren't a bad bike. They are fantastic in almost all ways, especially the RRSs. And Beta offers a wide range of different suspensions and feels. And that's kind of a good thing. I know if you go all the way back to the early fuel injection days of Beta to now, there's a lot of changes, but none of the bikes are what I would consider a dud or a bad, or there's not a year that you wouldn't want to buy. The Betas, some of them have their quirks. Some have the electrical connector issues, which are generally super simple to solve. It's a matter of unplugging and cleaning them up and greasing them up, and some of the connectors I zip tie because they come apart. But Beta fixed a lot of those problems in the new 2021s as well.
Yeah, I haven't had any issues with any of my electrical components at all. Yeah. And I think as we try and sit here and think about, if somebody was watching this video and thinking, well, I want to buy a Beta, but which one should I get? I think the short answer, based on my perspective, and I have a lot more limited experience with these bikes than you do, is I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. I think it depends on what you want to use it for. And I think I mentioned in my last video, if you wanted to ride trails, ATV trails, single track, things like that, and have a trail bike that is road legal, that you can ride from your garage if you need to, I think the 390 is probably the sweet spot.
Yep. I tend to agree with that too, and it really depends on who you are, because I've said this in a lot of my videos, it depends on what your riding style is, how big you are, and I don't mean that in a, like if you're fat or not kind of thing, because if you were seriously like say you're 6'5" and you weigh 300 pounds, like the 500 is probably going to be more your deal. Like it all depends on who we are as people and how we ride. Like generally speaking, I'm a slower rider. I don't I'm not one to rip on the trails as fast as I possibly can. I've had too many accidents on the past with people running into me and whatnot. I just kind of chill. But that's not to say that if you're a mild rider that you won't enjoy the 500. It means that you have to concentrate more. For me personally, riding the 500, I had to pay a lot more attention to throttle control, and that's not a bad thing. It's just it's another thing that you have to kind of think of. Whereas the 390, I just feel like the power is a little bit more controllable down low, and you can manage it as more of a novice easier. If you're a hard rider, real fast and whatnot, like you might go towards a race edition 500 because you want as much power, as much suspension as you possibly can. But if you're a dual sport guy looking into paying a little bit more money for a more advanced bike, and you're a slower rider, the 390 with the Sachs suspension is usually the way to go. For most people, I'm going to say that the Sachs suspension is absolutely fantastic. I don't think there's a dual sport out there that has a better suspension. There probably isn't. And 2021, I kind of fixed the harshness that everybody complained about in the 19s and older for the Sachs. So yeah, that's another cool factor too. So as you move as a rider between which ones you want, the 350, I gave that one a lot of crap when I was buying mine. I didn't like the 350 when I was riding it around from Apex Sports here in the Springs. I felt that it had a very numb rev range and it was very peaky. But I need to try that again. I need to find somebody. I don't know anybody that has bought a 350, so I got to find somebody. Because I'm kind of curious now that I have my old Suzuki DR 350. It's a terrible comparison, but
well,
yeah.
I mean, it's a good comparison from the standpoint of everybody's situation is a little bit different. I'm a bigger guy. I'm well over 200 pounds. Before I start off with gear and things, but I'm also older, and as I get older, I don't have the stamina that I used to have, and I'm not as physically powerful as I used to be. In my 20s, I was quite strong, and so I could muscle around a 500-pound KLR 650 on double track ATV trails, even with a 30-mile-an-hour first gear, and I just muscled my way through it. Well, now that I'm in my 50s, I don't really want to do that, so I wanted to go with a lighter machine. That's actually why I didn't buy a DRZ 400. I was trying to save 60 pounds of weight.
So the DRZ 400, everybody loves that bike because that's the dual sport that's been around forever from Suzuki. And it gets praised because the Super Numoto guys really love it, and they could care less about weight, to be honest. And then us dirt bikers, we get by with that bike because the price is good, it's reliable, it's the Honda Civic of all bikes, period. But when it comes down to the riding experience of the DRZ, it is heavy, it is underpowered, and picking it up really sucks. Taking it through really tight technical trails is not fun. I don't care who you are, and I've done it all with the DRZ. It is not a fun bike to take on all that stuff. It feels like a pig, and it really is. It's 330 pounds. So when you go to something like these, even this 500, I think what its weight on paper is
244.
Yeah,
dry, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think when you get it all fueled up and oiled and everything else, I think it turns out right around 260. That's a lot different than 330.
Yeah, that's huge. And a lot of people would be like, well, yeah, you're paying for that. And right now it's probably the worst time just because the prices of everything is so high right now. When I bought my Beta, I only paid about $9,000 for it. So that made the difference between, let's just say, a DRZ 400 and a Beta 390. Well, for a few $1,000 more, yeah, the Beta 390 was a huge step up from something like the DRZ. And I usually get quoted because people will say, oh, they're not as reliable, their maintenance intervals are super tight. And their maintenance intervals at Beta and KTM Husqvarna are all race intervals.
Yeah.
I can honestly say that I don't follow those intervals. Oil is cheap, so a lot of times I just, after a few rides, will do an oil change. But to do a whole new piston, sleeves, rings at 90 hours, and my bike's already long past that, and there's no problems with the bike. So a lot of that stuff, if you're racing and you're really hard on your bikes, yeah, you're going to be rebuilding them. And I don't think that would be different for a DRZ either. Not that anybody races those, I don't think.
I suppose if we looked hard enough, we might find somebody who does. But that's actually a good point, because even the new Honda CRF 450, well, I say new, it's only been out for 3 years now.
Yeah.
That, you look at the owner's manual on that, and you look at the owner's manual on a KTM or a Husky or a Sherco, they're all going to have very similar maintenance intervals. They're going to want you to do the same sort of stuff that the Beta asks you to do in the manual as well. So, you know, the only time you really get away from that fully is if you do go to the really old technology like the DRZ, or you buy a Honda XR650, which hasn't changed in 35 years or however many years since they came out with it. That's the only time you get away from that.
And I know, like Meeker Extreme, he rode the 500 a lot more than I've ridden my 390. I think when he got rid of that bike, he was close to, I think it was over 300 hours on the bike, and then 3,000 miles-ish maybe. And that bike was heavily abused from single track to slipping the clutch real hard to being dropped. It had very few problems. Now, some of the problems, we broke stuff on the bike. It did have a head bolt oil leaking issue that was known for the 19s at the time. That was fixed, or a solution was sent by Tim at Beta USA. So once again, great communication, and I know it was their review bike, but lots of other people on the forums have talked about Beta coming up with a pretty good solution for fixing those, or fixing them for totally free. So you know, stuff like that is what makes Beta awesome. They're an easy company to talk to, but it just kind of proves that the 19s to 2021 now, they're all great bikes. And I think from the 2015 is when they started doing EFI, I think. There were electrical gremlins, and there were some problems with the throttle bodies in 15. But Beta is real open to helping you out. And even as old as those bikes were, I couldn't imagine if you had problems that they wouldn't try to find a decent solution that didn't cost you a ton of money.
Yeah, one of the things with the electrical gremlins that they had with the older models is the gauge of the wire for all the electrical systems was smaller, it was thinner, and it's just more prone to breakage and things like that. They've since upgraded, or beefed up the caliber and the gauge of the wire in the electrical systems, which has helped eliminate a lot of that. So things are constantly improving, but if you're kind of in the market for figuring out what bike to buy, if you can find a 2019, a 2020, 2017 even probably, Beta that is kind of meeting what you're looking for, I would say don't hesitate to pick that thing up. The fun factor of these bikes compared to a DRZ, even the new Honda CRF 450 is corked up, underpowered, has flame out issues, which I guess they can fix with a mapping issue, but it's also 300 plus pounds by the time you get the fuel in it and everything else. So it's going to be heavier, it's not going to have as much power. So to me, the fun factor diminishes a lot. And that's the thing I really like about these Betas. And I thoroughly enjoyed riding that 390. I think for a trail bike, that is probably the way to go. A road legal, DOT approved, spark arrested trail bike. I don't think you can beat that 390.
You also see a lot of people who buy these expensive bikes and they don't ride them. They put like 5 or 10 hours on them, and then they sell them. That is super common. If you're looking for a Beta, go onto Facebook, go join the Beta USA pages. You will find dozens of ads for people who, I don't know, they hit their midlife crisis and decided it wasn't for them. I don't know. But that offers a good deal. At least I wanted to make this video because right now new bikes are really expensive. Betas right now are upwards of $11,000,
yeah.
I think. They're not offering deals because they're strapped for production and they're real high demand right now. So looking at older Betas is a good idea. And I know a lot of people are very wary of buying Betas, especially used, because there's just not a lot of information out there about them. Their notoriety is still building, and people want to know, hey, are they reliable? Do they break? Do they have all these problems? And I think between both of us, of course, he hasn't had a lot of time on the 2021, but I have over 100 hours on my 390. I haven't done anything to it other than oil changes. I haven't had any problems with it. Meeker Extreme had the 500. Moonbeamer is another good channel. He has an older 2016 390 that he recently did a full rebuild of. He's got videos of everything. I think he rebuilt at, I think it was 90 hours. He was having some odd issues, and the previous owner didn't do filter changes properly, so there was sand up inside the throttle body, and he just decided to tear the whole thing apart. That's a great video showcasing how reliable and how good the Beta engine really is. When he tore it down, there was really no problems wrong with it, and it was at that time period where Beta would technically recommend for you to rebuild the motor, and it didn't need it.
Well, that's actually a good point, because when you get on a motorcycle where the engine is nearing the end of its life and it needs to be rebuilt, you can feel it. You can kind of sense it. Everything gets a little bit sluggish. It doesn't run quite as well. Throttle response goes down and everything else. And I only rode yours once, and I didn't know what it was like when it was brand new. But I did not get any sense at all that that engine was struggling in any way, shape, or form, even at well over 100 hours. And super quick. Gosh, I spent most of my time on it in second gear, pop out of a corner, blip that throttle, stand that bike up if you wanted to. I mean, without any effort. If you're looking for something that's going to up your fun factor and really be confidence inspiring on the trails, I think it's really hard to beat a Beta, especially that 390 RRS.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to the different models. Like, they're all pretty awesome. The only engine I'm not a fan of from Beta's lineup is really the 430, and that's all a personal preference. I feel like it's the 430 was made to compete with the 450 race bikes, and they wanted a very top end bike. And the 430 does have bottom end, but I find that the 430's bottom end is very rough. I haven't ridden the newer 2021, so they may have fixed that. But I know in 19, the 430 just felt like it wanted to be up high at all times and really ridden hard, and that was not the bike for me, or not the engine for me, I suppose.
All right, guys. So appreciate you guys coming along today and joining us for our little chat about Betas and riding motorcycles in general. And if you have any questions or comments, if you got any information about Betas on other model years, or what's your favorite, or if you have any thoughts on things that we might have missed, let us know. Write it in the comments, and it'll help educate all of us.
And we are gonna go get something to drink because it's hot.
Absolutely.